We could say that other arts have this, but like any art where you have to learn your lessons through your body, like experiencing it, is a little different than learning it from a PowerPoint, right? So,
well, I would say there's another component of learning when you're talking about learning things that are just knowledge-based or things that are skill-based.
yeah, okay. So if you, well, let me give you a concrete example to see what I'm talking about. So in mount training, and they might have a new term for it now.
Still called mount training, or close quarters battle.
Okay. You could over-pursue, you could under-pursue. So you can talk about violence of action is, of course, important. Or you can be too aggressive and shoot someone that's a no-shoot.
Sure.
Right? And I can write that on the whiteboard for you and tell you about it, but it's different when you learn it in an actual activity.
It's definitely true.
And there's emotionality. We all know about the guy who passes guard with over pursuit or under pursuit, or boxes with over pursuit and under pursuit. And when you pay by getting hit in the liver, or when you pay by getting guillotined, it's a different type of lesson than just a PowerPoint that says.
Yeah, my father used to say. My father used to say that the best way to make the best way to make someone into a man is blood boogers. Right? So yeah, it is certainly true. So we're mixing up a bunch of different kinds of learning here, but they're all related, right?
Okay.
So first thing is, when you're trying to acquire a skill, you have the psychomotor learning process, right? So what percentage of teachers of any physical skill in America have any concept of what's going on with the psychomotor learning process and how human bodies and how human beings actually learn physical skills? Because that number's really, really low as well, right? Like so just so everybody, just so all the listeners will know from here on out, the psychomotor learning process is a 3-stage process. So the first phase is a cognitive phase. That's whenever you see the skill. So imagine we were trying to teach people how to play the violin or any physical skill, right? So the first thing we would do is show them, And so that could be watching YouTube, or it could be an instructor telling you or something like. What's going on though is that your prefrontal cortex is receiving the information through your eyes, and then it's trying to interpret it and tell your body how to emulate it, right? Okay, so that's what's going on in the psychomotor learning process. It's like the white belt stage, right? So remember back when you were training and you were thinking through the techniques as you were doing them. Step 1, step 2, step 3, in the way that the instructor told you to do it, right?
That's me.
Yeah, so that's the first phase, right? Well, and this is an important thing to know, right? So right when you're doing that, you're working in your working memory. That's the memory that, like, I just put that book down so I remember it, or I was getting a drink, and then you know what I mean? So your working memory, it's got a limited capacity. So you put that stuff in there, and then you start working into the second phase, which is called the associative phase. Okay, so the associative phase is when you start to take the knowledge that you have in your working memory, your short-term memory, and you start to put it into your long-term memory, okay? So that process is technically called encoding. You encode that information into your long-term memory, and that's what allows you to be able to recall it, okay? So the encoding process, I'll give you an example. So like when you were a kid and you were learning learning to spell words, right? They give you a list of vocabulary words, and you're going to have spelling test on Friday, so you'd go home and write them all 75 times each. So that's rote memorization, and it's a way to encode information so that you could recall it later. It's also the least efficient way to do so. So you can do it, but it's like burning it into your head, and it doesn't burn very well, and it takes a lot of repetitions, okay? This is also the exact same thing you're doing when you learn a technique. Okay, so you're in that cognitive phase at the beginning, and then you do it a whole lot of times, right? So you drill that technique again and again. It's just exactly the same process as writing down that spelling word again and again and again so you can recall it. Okay, so that's the least efficient way. Also, So if you want to make it more efficient, what you've got to do is start putting it more in context and start evolving more of your brain. So for example, if I say we're going to do a drill, and this drill is that you're going to escape the mount with the arm trap and roll, and you're going to come up inside somebody's guard. So as soon as you get there, you're going to make posture, and then you're going to do guard pass A, right? So that is going to put that posture and guard pass A in the context of that they will happen in the fight, right? So that guard pass is going to be learned better if you spend the time putting it in that context, those repetitions that you were doing, and so each time you're doing the escape the mount and then passing the guard, right? Because it's going to aid you in recall. So that moment when you actually do roll them out in a fight, you're going to then go to posture because you've already got it in context, right? It follows that move. And then you're going to start working on that guard pass because it follows that move, right?
So it's not in isolation by itself.
Correct.
It's associated in a network
Correct,
of
right?
ideas.
So exactly right. So then this, you can expand that idea even more, right? So the next idea is that you sort of build a blueprint around it, right? So I'll give you an example. So in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world, we have the hierarchy of position, right? So everybody in Jiu-Jitsu knows if you're asked people in Jiu-Jitsu, is it better to have somebody on rear mount or is it better to have them mounted on you? And almost everybody in Jiu-Jitsu knows, it's a little bit better to have them mounted on you. Okay, so is it better to have them mounted or in side control? So it's better to have them in side control. Is it better to have them in side control or to have them in your guard, right? So we know that. So all the way from the worst position, which is having somebody on your back, to the best position, which is being on somebody's back. That's the hierarchy of position, right? So what that hierarchy of position does is it orients you wherever you are in the fight, where you should be trying to go, right? What's the next place? From here, I'd like to go there. Okay, so Jiu-Jitsu people know that wherever they're at, this is where I should go, right? Now it doesn't hold true when you're two black belts fighting. But by then they're experts. But when you're teaching white belts, that is a memory aid to them, right? So then in cognitive theory or learning theory, that's called a schema. And it means that you give them this overarching idea where they can put those smaller groups like if I'm mounted, so I arm trap and roll, I come up in the guard, now I want to start passing the guard, right? So we said earlier, that's going to aid me in remembering those techniques. And then if I put them in that whole schema of the hierarchy of position, that's going to aid me in remembering all of my techniques because I'm going to have these little like cognitive cues that tell me, oh yeah, now remember this. You see what I mean? So that's why, for example, whenever you're teaching a class, you have to like bring that idea into the class at some point, or teaching a group of students. You have to bring those ideas in because it will make them remember the techniques better. So think about this, right? Like how many jiu-jitsu techniques do you know? Like it's a lot, right? Like I have no idea how many jiu-jitsu techniques I know. I have no clue, man. I've been studying jiu-jitsu for 25 years. Like it's a bunch, right? So how do I keep them straight? How do I remember them whenever it's time for them to be needed? Because they are in context. Right. When I find myself here, these are the things I do.
Right. Same as you don't know how many words you know.
Have no idea, right?
You could never make a list.
Right. And so see what I mean about the psychomotor learning process. So all that portion, that's the second phase, right? The associative phase. What we're doing is making associations with those knowledge, those little things that we learned in the cognitive phase so that we can put them in our long-term memory. Okay, so now we're finally getting to the third phase, right? The third phase is called the autonomic phase. So in the autonomic phase of psychomotor learning, that's whenever you learn it so deeply that it's going into your autonomic nervous system. Okay, so when you do a physical skill, what happens is that your neurons and your brain cells and all that are making pathways, making connections to tell the muscles and the bones and everything to do the right stuff, right? And the more you do it, the more practice you've got at it, the better those pathways become. And when you've done it enough times, then you don't have to think about it anymore. Right? So I always give the example in my classes, like walk across the stage, I'm like, that seemed pretty difficult, right? Took everybody in the class a year to learn how to do it. Right? So by the time you've been walking enough to be 25 years old, you're not thinking about walking when you're walking, right? It's no longer in your prefrontal cortex. It's deep down in your autonomic nervous system. That's the same part of your nervous system that handles regulation of your temperature and hunger. You know what I mean? You automatically do that stuff. So I'll give you an example. So whenever a hockey player's skating down the ice, right, and they're handling the puck, what are they thinking about? They're not thinking about skating.
Something other than the coordination they picked
That's
up
right.
a long time ago.
Yeah, they're probably not even thinking about handling the puck, right? What they're probably thinking about is tactics. Where are all the good guys? Where are all the bad guys? What play are we running? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's because they've put the skating and puck handling into their autonomic nervous system because they're all the way into that last phase.
Same way a high-level black belt can know he's up 6-4.
That's right.
Match.
Yeah, if you watch the high-level guys going down, like every black belt, man, whenever guys have been training for 12, 15 years, he's not thinking of techniques in the way that white and blue and purple belts are thinking about techniques. He's just moving because the movement patterns. So jiu-jitsu is not a set of techniques, right? Jiu-jitsu is a movement pattern, the way you move in conflict with another human. The techniques are learning metaphors. We show you the technique because you're going to do this a bunch and it's going to start to make those pathways. And as we make this super complex set of pathways of motion in your brain, sooner or later, you just move.
Yeah. It'll never even be exactly like how the geometry you're using to show it to the world.
Yeah,
it won't even be exactly
It won't even be that. The techniques don't happen the way that, I mean, they do when you're fighting somebody you're better than, right? And you're like, okay, I'm going to do the,
You can literally put their arm there. And
I'm going to do the knee in the butt to break their legs open. I'm going to do the same side knee cut pass. My hand's going to go here. When you're fighting somebody you're way better than, you can go down just like that. But whenever you see two good people, it's not like that at all.
You gotta be in the flow state, I think.
Well, what I would say is that,
maybe.
yeah, what I would say is that, and this is kind of a slightly different topic, is in up till purple belt, you're working on flow, okay? And let me take a second to make sure we're talking a clear distinction about. We're talking about athletic technique versus the psychological concept of flow state. So we could talk about more on that in a second, but this is a different thing, right? So what I mean now in the context of jiu-jitsu or fighting is that you are moving smoothly. So when you watch two good purple belts roll, their move is beautiful, right? They know most of jiu-jitsu, and they're both about the same pace, and they're feeling the moves, and etc. When you watch two black belts roll, it's not like that anymore. And the reason it's not like that anymore is because they have added elements that the purple belts don't have, which is all about timing and pressure. You know what I mean? Like, so imagine, like a good example, right? Like when you fight a wrestler and they're like explosive. Well, when you fight a good black belt, they're explosive too, but in a more nuanced way, right? Like he might put, like imagine I'm trying to hold this tight, right? And the guy will push pressure like this, right? And as soon as he lets off pressure, I probably will too, because that's just the way a feel works. So he'll push, relax a little bit, then jab it through because it'll go, because that guy's going to relax there, right? So if you take that concept and add it to, that's just one little nuance, but if you add it to the way, the smooth knowledge of jiu-jitsu and all that purple belts are doing, you get a little bit different animal, and that's why the black belts can beat the purple belts, even though the purple belts know most of the techniques.
Right.